Lead me to some soul today. Oh, teach me
Welcome,
the
everyone,
just
to
what
episode
to
number
say.
50 of a series of episodes that we've called and are calling Leading Others to Christ. Those of you that have been watching and listening, you know that during these episodes, we're going to be focused on evangelism. And one of our goals, and we have several and it's really fascinating because as we continue to do these, our list of things to do continues to grow too. So that's exciting. But one of our goals is to stir us up. To stir us up, the Hebrew writer said, to love and good works, but especially in the area of reaching our family, our friends, our neighbors with the gospel of Christ. My name is Dan Barker, and I preach for the Creekside Church of Christ in Franklin, Indiana. For those of you that are not familiar with Indiana, Franklin's about 20 miles south of downtown Indianapolis. And those of you that know me know that I'm passionate about our subject today. And I have been ever since I obeyed the gospel when I was 21 years old in Owensboro, Kentucky. And since then, I've always been striving to listen to different ones, to read anything I could get my hands on, of learning how to teach others. I'm going to use some Bible phrases here. Learn how to sow the seed, to learn how to be a fisher of men and women, to learn how to make disciples, to know how to persuade men and women, and to teach others to teach. I see myself more as a teacher than a preacher, but I always try to remember what Paul said to Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:2. And the things, he said to Timothy, the things that you've heard from me among many witnesses, commit these to faithful men and obviously women who will be able to teach others also. And then later in the chapter, he uses this phrase that I really like. Paul was encouraging Timothy to be useful for the master, prepared for every good work. So last year in 2020, when all this COVID stuff started, came up with this idea to do interviews, to identify the men and women around the country, those fellow workers that are doing this, the ones that are out there teaching others and reaching others, and interview them and find out why are they doing this, how are they doing it, what tools are they using, where are they working currently. And so that's a little backdrop that I do almost every time when we start these. But we're so excited today to have someone with us that we're going to be able to learn a lot from. And I encourage you, as we often do, to get out your pad and pen and take some notes, because there's going to be some things that you're going to hear today that you're going to want to remember. But our guest today is Wayne Galloway. Welcome, Wayne.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you with us today. Wayne works with the Stanford Church of Christ in Stanford, Kentucky. And I'll let you tell everybody where Stanford is in a few minutes. But we're so happy to have you here today. And when we talked yesterday or earlier in the week about the interview, and I have it down on my notes to be sure to tell Phyllis hi again if you didn't the other day. But we are just delighted to. I was trying to think, when did we first meet? Yeah, can you remember when we first met?
Well, I remember you as a coach at Florida College.
Yeah, there you go. I thought that was right. That's back when I had hair. I was coaching, but and you too, yeah. But I knew it'd been a long time. But I just I've enjoyed our relationship over the years and the family, and I'm just anxious to talk to you because you've got a lot of things that you can share with us. But we kind of start this out, Wayne, with what we call like the old elevator pitch. You know, if you get on an elevator and you stand there face to face with somebody and somebody says, "What do you do? What do you do for a living?" And so the elevator pitch or the short bio, tell everyone, if you would, just a little where you were born, how old you were when you obeyed the gospel, and kind of bring us up to speed of where you are today.
Well, Dan, I was born in Glasgow, Kentucky, and I obeyed the gospel in a little congregation called Bearwallow, which was north of Glasgow, when I was 12 years old. My parents, I remember when they were baptized. I was probably 9 or so. My dad knew the truth, but had not made any commitment. My mother, her family had been associated with a denomination, but neither one of them were actively involved in any kind of religious commitments at all. And so I was able to watch them be baptized at age 9 or so.
Wow.
And I became a Christian when I was 12. And I recall very well what happened. Of course, from the time I was about 10 or so, we'd been going to Bible classes and I'd heard a variety of different stories. And my mother had even read to us when we were younger, Bible stories. But I'd never put all that together and made application to myself. And we had a gospel meeting going on. And they said, have you ever thought about becoming a Christian? Well, I really hadn't. And that shocked me. And I began to listen to the lessons with a different perspective relative to application to myself.
And that's when you were 12.
That's when I was 12.
Yeah. And of course, we all know different levels. I was 21, as I said earlier, and really fought it. When I was exposed to the truth earlier, I just said, this can't be right. And I grew up in a denomination too, and just the challenges, and my future wife and my future mother-in-law gave me books to read, and there were a lot of debates, and I would read those debates and get mad and didn't understand a lot of things. But I just think it's, so it's fascinating. I don't think we've had anyone say that, of where you were old enough to witness your parents obeying the gospel, and then you did too at a young age. And did you always want to be a preacher when you were?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. So when people would say, when you were little, Wayne, what do you want to be when you grow up? You remember what you said or what you were thinking?
I wanted to be an engineer, to be like my cousin.
How about that?
Had this grand job and did magnificent things. And when I went away to Florida College, I determined that I was going to be an engineer and entered into a pre-engineering program. I became a preacher when there's a story behind that, and I won't take up too much time maybe telling it.
That's good. Hear it.
I had gone to the library and pulled off the shelves a variety of different books regarding different vocations, and was looking through those books one night, and my roommate came in and he said, "Why don't you give it up?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, you want to preach." And I said, "I do not know that." Wow. And he said, you know that you want to preach." I insisted that I did not. And that summer, he was preaching for a small congregation out in Fountain Run, Kentucky. And he was not going to be able to be there on a Sunday, and called me. And I said, "Okay, I'll do it for you. I'll prepare this lesson and I'll go there and present this lesson for you." And the next thing I knew, he had me going every week. During the process of that, I still was not interested in preaching. But there was a man there that could not read or write, that in a Bible class, we were studying about family relationships. And he began to tear over. He spoke about how that he wanted to influence his family with the message of the gospel, but they would not listen to him because he was a drunk when they were children. And so they wouldn't listen to him. And I thought in that Bible class, if I could devote my life to something that would be helpful to people like this, that they didn't have to experience this kind of hurt, then my life would have been spent in something that was worthwhile. So when I went back to Florida College, I made the determination that, okay, I'll start studying the scripture in more detail, and give consideration to devoting my time to preaching, teaching people.
Well, I just find those stories fascinating. And it's like, this came up, I think, in one of our first interviews, and it might have been with Benjamin Lee, but this idea of what if, and it just kind of fascinates me, because when you were in the library that day going through the books, when your friend came up What did he say to you? Stop it, or what? What would you?
Why don't you give it up?
Why don't you give it up? You know, and stimulate that thinking, and then the opportunity that you had there back when you went back to Kentucky. What if those incidents hadn't occurred? What if your friend hadn't even come into the library that night? You know, to stimulate the thinking that we have. But I just find those things fascinating of the people that have crossed our paths, and what if they hadn't, and what if, you know, providence of God is a fascinating subject to me, and I don't understand it like I wish I did, but I could. But I just find that fascinating. So I've been asking almost everyone, well, why are you doing this? Why are you leading people to Christ? And so that energy has just grown over the years, right? Because you've been preaching for a while now.
I've been preaching for 45 years. I thought you might ask that question, and so I counted it up.
You figured it up, right? Well, that's just fascinating. Tell us a little bit, if you would, about the group there at Stanford.
Well, we are out in the country. The town that we live in, Stanford, and we're associated with the Fort Logan Church of Christ, is a town of about 2,600 people. The whole county is about 6,000, I would say. So we're in a rural environment, and the circumstances are certainly different here than I think that they are in more metropolitan areas. We don't get a whole lot of people moving through and that sort of thing. It's kind of a settled community. We don't have a whole lot of jobs to keep our young people. That's part of the problem here. One of the things that we've tried to focus on here in this community is the relationships that are inherent in the small town kind of community. They're stable. They involve years and years of trust building and those kinds of things. And as you're thinking about influencing people with the gospel, I think those kinds of things can be very helpful. In addition to the providence of God and bringing people together, which is absolutely critical, our relationship with the person becomes a key factor. They learn to trust us and learn then from us to have faith in the one that we have faith in.
Yeah. First of all, I want to apologize. I don't know why I said Stanford Church. I knew it was Fort Logan, but I apologize for that. But no, we've interviewed, as we said earlier, you're number 50, but we've interviewed people from New York, from Seattle, Washington, California, Tampa, the Florida area, North, South Carolina. And that's one thing that's obviously comes out and it makes sense, is the environment, like you're touching on there, is so different. I mean, if you, like in talking to Caleb Churchill up in Harlan, New York, when he walks out of his place there, I mean, there's just a steady flow of traffic on the sidewalk.
Yes.
And to think about, it's so different in the different people that he sees on a daily basis. But I think that's a fascinating part of understanding evangelism, is understanding the environment that you're in and all those things. But relationships, I talk about that a lot, and I think that's so important. And that we have to develop relationships with people before they'll ever trust us enough to sit down and talk about Jesus, right?
Exactly. And as I look into the text of Scripture, I find this relationship web inherent in what the text of Scripture says. The household of Lydia responds, the household of the jailer. And sometimes people say, well, who are these people in one's household? Is that just your immediate family? And in the New Testament text, it's not just your immediate family. It could include the servants and work associates and all of that kind of thing. So someone says, well, who is my household? My response has been to that, well, give consideration to who would come to your funeral. Those people are the ones that you have an influence with and that you love and that love you. So there is your household. These are the people that trust you, that have a feeling of confidence in you, and probably know something about your integrity and your character, and are interested in perhaps learning why you are who you are.
I think that's really good. I've heard that said before in some context of the who's going to show up to your funeral and the relationships. I'm glad you brought that up. That was good. I know. I think the last time I saw you, you were in a meeting up here in Indianapolis, and maybe I saw you somewhere before then. But I know you've done a lot of gospel meetings over the years, and I know that something that's near and dear to you is you do some work overseas, don't you?
I have, over the last 20 years, made frequent trips to Colombia, South America, and it's a very rewarding part of my experience as a preacher. The circumstances there are quite different than they are here. There is a great love for souls by the preachers and teachers and Christians in Colombia. For example, I was on one of the mountains overlooking the city of Bogota, and I asked Nestor Bermudez, I said, how many people live in the city of Bogota? He said, about 9 million souls.
Wow.
He didn't say people.
Yes.
About 9 million souls. That's his perspective. And I think that that's the perspective that we need to have the kind of motivation to perceive the value of these souls that we're working with.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, just to think about that, to go from Stanford population, you said there, to be standing there looking at 9 million people, 9 million souls.
It's awesome.
That's awesome. So tell a little, because I don't know the story. How'd you end up going to Colombia the first time?
Well, Royce Chandler came to the congregation here interested in finding support. And so I asked him, I said, well, would it be a possibility for me to go and actually visit and be in contact with people? He said, certainly. And one thing led to another. And so in 20 years, we've made probably 30 trips or more.
Wow.
In 2018 and 19, Phyllis and I spent January, February, and March in Colombia preaching. In 90 days, I think I preached and taught about 100 different lessons.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. So there I could do as much teaching in 3 months as I do here probably in 6 months. But one of the things that I found interesting about Colombia is you've got different circumstances, and the questions that I am asked here in Kentucky are quite different than the questions that I'm asked in Colombia. To give you an example of that, we were invited to one congregation. I preached there, and there was a lady in the congregation that said, do you have a night free to come over to the town where I live and do a lesson there? And I said, sure. So we were able to go to this little town called Chinu. And this lady and her mother went out that afternoon and handed out flyers in her community. And they set up a little meeting place in her backyard with lights and chairs, and probably 20 people showed up for the Bible study. During the Bible study, after I'd completed the Bible study, I got this question from an individual that had never been there before, I think. He said, does God forgive people who kill people? Now, that's not a question that I usually receive here in Kentucky.
Right.
But I think that he had a good reason for asking that question. I interpreted that perhaps indeed he had killed people. That's not something that is necessarily uncommon in Colombia. You know, you have rebels, you have the paramilitary groups, you have the army. And I don't know which he might have been associated with, but my suspicion was that in the past he had been associated with a group like that. Some of the other brothers talked to him, of course, in Spanish for some time, and he was baptized the next day.
Wow.
The next time that we're there in that area, we go back, there he is again. He's still there, still faithful to the Lord. So radical transitions. People have experienced painful circumstances, and they have done painful things as sinners. And meeting that and seeing the forgiveness that is available from a God that could forgive even me, how magnificent that is. What a gift to be able to bring that to somebody else after having experienced it yourself.
So good. Several things there. I told you I try to feed off of whatever comments are made, but 2 or 3 things you said. That number one is that you bring up the idea of questions that people ask us. And we've all experienced that where I have certainly, where people ask me a question and I go, in my mind, I go, whoa, I haven't been asked that one before. And one of the things I started doing on the study that I do with people, I always have my yellow pad with me, and I preface the study when we start. And I say, if you, we're going to be looking in the Bible, but any questions you have, feel free to ask them. But I say, if you ask one that doesn't really apply to what we're on right now, so we're not chasing squirrels or rabbits or whatever, I say, that's a great question. And I say, I'm going to write it down, then we'll answer it later. Is that okay? And people will agree to that, but it saves me so many times because it gives me a chance to go do some research if I have to. But the other thing I was thinking is that look how much better equipped Wayne Galloway is because that guy asked you that question. Yeah. Now, right? You're better equipped to know how to answer that today than you were then. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's part of all the growth process. And then the radical transition. Wow. We could talk about that for a while, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what so many people have a problem with. And I've seen this too, even with, sadly, that even some that have obeyed the gospel, they saw the truth and at that moment they wanted to be saved, if you will, but they didn't really realize what transformation was all about and weren't willing to give up some of the things in the world. And it just breaks your heart when you see someone do that. Because they don't fully see it for one reason or another. But no, I think that's great. And the fact that he, back to the what if again. What if that lady you were talking about didn't come up and say, she had to have the courage to say, could you come to my hometown?
Right.
And then she had to have the courage to invite her neighbors to come over to her backyard.
Certainly.
And what if she hadn't invited him? What if he hadn't shown, it's fascinating. It's just fascinating.
Yes.
I wanted to do this real quick because the time goes so fast on these, but mentioned Phyllis earlier. And I'm glad you mentioned there that she went with you. So she had the opportunity and you had the blessing of having her with you while you were there in Colombia for a few months. But just real quick, because I think a lot of times preachers and elders are maybe guilty of not recognizing or giving their spouse enough appreciation, if you will, for the role that they play in an evangelist's life. Could you maybe just address that? How important has Phyllis been to you in your marriage and in your work?
Critical. She's critical to it. Not only from the standpoint of supporting me, but she is able to make contact with people in a way that sometimes I'm not able to. I can remember a couple that began coming to worship, assembling with us on an occasion, and they would come in at the last moment before time for the assembly to begin, and then they would leave the first people out the door. And we had 2 little boys, and Phyllis sat kind of on the back pew, and I remember her one time running out of the building to catch them.
Yes.
To talk with them. They were responsive to that, ended up becoming Christians. Good things happened over the years as a result of that. As a matter of fact, they even helped us in our support going to Colombia on occasion.
Wow.
So, to see that kind of thing happen, and for her to be a part of it. One of the things that we've learned to do over the years is if there are visitors to a worship assembly, if we can invite them into our home, it kind of breaks the ice and cultivates the relationship. If we can invite them into our home for a meal or something like that, it gives us some opportunity then to go further with them. not only in the cultivation of the relationship, of course, but in being able to influence them with the message of the gospel. And this has worked multiple times. We have tried to do it over the years. I really wish that we could get everybody in the Lord's church to be sensitive to those that assemble with us on occasion that are not Christians, just visitors.
Yes.
I think that sometimes we lose that opportunity by not making the continual connection.
Yeah, that's we've talked about that a lot. I mean, you look at, I mentioned this the other day, and this has come up several times, and not to be negative at all, but the reality is right now in a lot of places out here, the Lord's church is dying. I mean, literally dying. There's no evangelism going on for whatever reason. The people that are there, and I don't know, so you have to be careful what you say. But it seems as though they never learned their personal responsibility to develop relationships in the community, and like you say, to be hospitable, to have people over, so to talk to them about Christ, and the number of churches that are closing their door, and the number of those that are leaving. That's why we've been trying to do this, to try to maybe like a wake up call. I have an article, and I've mentioned a couple of times in interviews that it was published in the Owensboro Messenger and Enquirer there in Owensboro, Kentucky. And it was on April the 30th, 1960. So I would have been 14 years old, never exposed to the church or anything at that time. But the title of the article was that Church of Christ, the fastest growing church in America.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine seeing a headline like that today, Wayne?
We've got a message that no one else has. We need to recognize its value, and we need to appreciate that we have the world-changing message. I'm afraid that we become too involved in our own affairs, too internally focused. If we learn to love other people more, now I don't mean to fault our brotherhood at all, because I believe that we've got people that love others.
Absolutely.
That are concerned, that are willing to make sacrifices financially and of their time and that kind of thing. But somehow or the other, we've got to get kind of refocused on what's important here.
Well, obviously I agree. And that was one of the reasons, as I said earlier, why we started doing this, is I wanted to find the ones that still are on fire, if you will, the ones that are out there. Where are they? Men and women, preachers, elders, deacons, members in the congregation, and how are they doing this? And what can I get excited when I'm around Wayne. All right. It stirs me up. And I think I need that associate. Somebody said years ago that we're the average of the 5 people that we're around. And that we spend the most time with. Some of us, we look at the ones that we're around with, and we go, wait a minute, maybe I need to expand my circle here a little bit. But it excites me, and all these interviews we've done, I get so excited afterwards because of just the energy that was there during the interview, and hearing the stories and hearing the conversations. Believe it or not, Matt's already held up 5. We've got 5 minutes to go. All right. That's all right. We might go over today. Let's do this real quick. So I appreciate, before I get off that, I appreciate you staying on fire there in that part of Kentucky and in Columbia, and keep up your good work, brother. We really appreciate that. You've already mentioned a couple, and maybe that was one of the ones you wanted to talk about, but have you got a conversion story that you'd like to share with us?
I do.
Good.
This is something that happened a few years ago. There was a young Colombian young lady that came to Stanford, Kentucky to practice her English.
Oh,
Now, that's an interesting feature right there. And She was able to spend some time in our home, and she heard me preach every Sunday. She came to our assemblies, Bible classes, and all of that kind of thing. And we were talking about asking questions. She was an individual that asked questions. And she would catch me alone in the living room and start asking me questions about what I was teaching. And I would try to give answers, and you could tell that she was really interested in what she was learning. After a few months, her interest had grown to the point, and she had to return to Columbia. She was interested in becoming a medical doctor and has since done that.
Wow.
She called me from Columbia once, and she said, "When are you coming to Columbia again?" And I told her, and she said, "Well," she said, "I want to be baptized when you get here." I said, "Well, that's a month or so out, and you need to go ahead and be baptized now." She said, "No." She said, "I've almost got my dad converted too."
Oh, wow.
She said, "I think within a month when you're here that you can baptize both of us."
Wow.
And when we went to Columbia, sure enough, she has influenced her dad to the point that he's ready to be baptized both of them. Then her mother was baptized sometime later. It's just an interesting story. And you say, well, where's the providence of God in this? Well, who knows? Why would a young Colombian be interested in coming to Kentucky to practice her English in the first place?
Yeah, because we've got our own dialect in Kentucky.
We have.
Yeah, we do. Well, that's a great story. And there you go again. Who'd she think of right away when she learned it? Well, herself, but immediately her thoughts went to her dad.
Her family, yes.
Her family, yeah. And that's the way this whole thing works as well. Well, thanks for sharing that. One of the things we have been ending the interviews with is what we call one thing. And there's obviously more than one thing, but if somebody was listening and they're excited and they want to say how to get the fire going again or get it started in the first place, and they want to talk to you some more, what would be one thing that you would say to somebody that they need to do or that they need to learn how to do to get involved in leading others to Christ?
Well, Farrell Jenkins taught me. He said, if you want to preach the gospel, you have to do two things. Number one, you have to learn the book. And number two, you have to learn the people. And I think that those are two critical elements. I'm going to put a different adjective to those two concepts. We have to love the book, we have to love the Lord, and we have to love the people.
Good.
And we need to understand that we're the bridge over which people that are lost can find life. People that have murdered people can now come to live and be forgiven by the Lord. People that are young can find hope and can look forward to a promising future and can look forward to influencing their friends and their relatives with something that is so powerful. One of the things that I guess I was taught in high school is that we ought to go out and try to influence the world in a positive way.
Right.
I guess that those teachers were saying in a particular vocation, enter into a vocation where you can make a contribution to the well-being of mankind. Well, I think that by communicating to people the message of the gospel, we're changing the world in a magnificent way. If we want the world to be a different place, then we're the agents of that change. The message of the gospel is the mechanism by which the world is going to be a different place. We want the world to become the kingdom of God. That's what the Lord wants. That's our purpose. Let's be busy about seeking the lost.
Oh, I wish we had more time because and you could say this. I know in any period. I was telling somebody the other day and talking about what's going on in our society right now and all of the political nonsense and the rhetoric and the fighting and fussing and stuff. I told somebody it reminds me of back when I was in high school and college in the '60s and all the racial turmoil and all the Vietnam War and Kennedy was killed, and Martin Luther King was killed, and yeah, I mean it's just. But the world is a mess right now, and Wayne, I know you know that, but yeah, just think that the message that we have is the message to bring peace, if you will, and to change the world, to get focused on the right things here, and so many times we go, oh, woe is me, and we've got the answer, and I love that you said we're the bridge. We can be the bridge to help that one that killed someone, or help. I don't know. It just gets so emotional and so powerful. But that the power. Just a quick thought, and we'll end. But just a thought that you have about the power of the gospel, the power of His word. What is that, Wayne? How do you describe that to somebody?
Well, when you're trying to teach someone, and we're talking about how the providence of God acts, the power of the gospel is not in our proficiency in communicating it. It's not how good of a teacher I am, but this message is it's powerful like a seed. It looks inanimate. It is inanimate. And yet you put it in the ground and give it the right conditions, and a plant comes up that is absolutely fantastic. I think that sometimes we think of the message of the gospel as this logical development of thought, and that's all it is. Yet there's more to it than that. It's not all about our presentation. It's about God working in people's hearts. If they can come to understand that even though I have done these horrible deeds, that God is gracious enough, loving enough, kind enough to sacrifice His Son for me, I am so unworthy. How powerful is that? We understand about giving gifts to people. We kind of soften each other's hearts and create relationships with the giving of gifts. Well, God has given the gift of His Son. What more could He do? He's put His Spirit within us, and let that Spirit influence the others as it comes out and is communicated through who we are.
I'm glad I asked you that one right at the end there. That's so good. And I guess takeaway thought is, what can we do, even with the people that we're around every day in our congregations, to stimulate them, and so that so many, we've heard these things over and over and over, and it's like somehow it's got to become a fresh thought with us, or a better appreciation, whatever the right way is to say it. But just to appreciate the things that you said here, just to be the bridge and the message of the world, and to be change agents, if you will, in a positive way. But all right, we're out of time. Thank you again, brother, for doing this, and I appreciate you and Phyllis so much. And Gay said to say hi again, but keep up your good work, and we love you and your family. And again, thank you so much for taking the time. Hey, I know if somebody wanted to reach out to you, would you mind giving a contact information where they could reach out if they wanted to talk to?
They can contact me through my email address. It is WTG2, the numeral 2, at Hughes, HUGHES.net.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks again. And Lord willing, we'll be able to see each other soon.
Well, thank you, Dan. Appreciate what you're doing, and our love to Gabe.
Thank you so much.
Melt my heart and fill my life. Give me one soul today.